million years did I think I'd be doing this for a living. Being the Catholic porn guy. It's an interesting thing. My mom would have been so proud, right? So proud. But here's the reality. And I just want you guys, the first note I want you to think about. If you yourself are not struggling with pornography, you absolutely know and love someone who is. That is the truth. Pornography doesn't discriminate. Rich, poor, young, old, daily communicant, or atheist. Doesn't matter. It's everywhere around us. And so when Father asked me, okay, there we go. When Father and I started talking about this, and then Father and I have been talking about this issue for a long time on a number of different levels, it really strikes me in the Catholic space, especially when we're thinking of vocations, this is a topic nobody wants to talk about. It's, bless you, sister. It's a very difficult topic to talk about. Yet here's the thing. All of your candidates, all of your potential have been exposed in one way or another to pornography. Every single one of them. There is not a kid alive today when the average age of exposure in the United States is between 8 and 10 years old. There is not a kid who hasn't seen it. That has an impact that we'll talk about in a minute on the brain. In our society today, as Father said, we're living in a hypersexualized world. And what that means is that younger and younger kids are being sexualized. Pornography usage and sexuality are completely normalized in their dysfunction today. Not in the way God intended, but in the dysfunction. And this is a spiritual battle, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just share something personal with you. Got into town yesterday, got a phone call from a client that I'm coaching, having some real trouble in his marriage, so I couldn't make dinner last night. I was on the phone with him. 3:30 this morning, I get a phone call from a priest in India who needs help with an issue. So from 3:30 to 5:30, I'm on the phone with him. 5:30, I go downstairs to get a cup of coffee. I get my coffee. I go back to my room. The key does not work. I'm locked out of my room till 7:45 this morning. This is a spiritual battle, right? Father and I just went to pray because when I walked in, I was so spun up. I was angry. I was shaking. I was nervous. This is a spiritual battle, guys. And when you start doing work and you start helping people with this struggle, he's going to attack you too. So be ready. In our society today, we're so connected, but so disconnected at the same time. Everybody is completely addicted to their phones and to technology, and yet they don't know how to communicate one-on-one with another human being. And so when you are talking to somebody about a potential vocation, that is one of the first things that you're going to have to help them do. They don't know how to do it. We live in an overly connected world that is completely isolating. And by the way, that's where they're comfortable. So you're going to ask them to not be isolated anymore, and it's going to make them really uncomfortable. Be prepared. This world is completely pornified. Everywhere you look, even on mainstream television, they make jokes about pornography like it's funny. We have medical professionals and psychological professionals talking about pornography and masturbation like it's normal and good for you. In fact, they're using it as therapy. This is what you're up against. Here's an interesting statistic. Think about this for a second. Most pornography in the United States is consumed between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. That means people are doing it during work. Kids are doing it during school and after school. And when you talk to companies, I've written a free ebook. If you go to our website, integrityrestored.com, you can get a copy of it. We have a number of free ebooks on there. When you talk to companies, they say, well, not in my company. That's impossible. We have everything locked down. They can't view pornography at work. And I kind of laugh, giggle, chuckle a little bit. Are you taking everybody's cell phone when they're walking in the door? Because this is where they're viewing pornography. We have given everyone in society, including our children, an X-rated movie theater in their pocket 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Two-thirds of Christian kids under the age of 18, so not just Catholic kids, but all denominations of Christians, regularly watch pornography. Two-thirds. Now, you want to know what's funny about that? That number is shocking enough, but it's not true. The number's bigger than that. Those two-thirds of kids are the ones that were willing to admit it. So everybody you speak to, potentially, is struggling with this issue. And we'll get into some of those struggles in a minute. You know, when I was growing up, well, when Father was growing up, he's a little older than me. It was only black and white. When I was growing up, they did color magazines. And if you saw a Playboy magazine, wow, it was a big deal. And nobody really thought anything of it. They'd be on coffee tables in people's houses. It was, you know, art. I wish that's all we had now, that the kids were being exposed to, is Playboy magazines. The pornography they are watching today is like nothing you can imagine. I promise you. It is violent, it is horrific, it is demonic. It is the most awful depravity you can imagine, and our children are watching it. Our parents are watching it, our grandparents. In fact, even some of our clergy. This problem is everywhere. Here's the interesting thing. The devil is smart. Lazy as can be, but smart. He knows, we all know Genesis, right? We all know that incredible story. The Lord God said, it's not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. And so God made woman, flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. And the two, he left his father and his mother, and the two became united, and they became one flesh. That, ladies and gentlemen, is in and through every part of our body, and it is a good thing. Sexuality is an amazing thing. Sexuality is holy. There's nothing bad about sexuality. Ladies and gentlemen, God created it. He made sexuality. He made us want that, have that desire, create the brain chemicals. I got to tell you a funny story. And the priest will remain nameless. When I came back to the church, man, was I on fire. I was on fire. And in my house, I went and I bought crucifixes and statues and icons and pictures. And everywhere in my house looked like a shrine, except the bedroom. Oh, no, no, no. I couldn't do it. So I had a priest over. We had moved. I had a priest over to bless the house, and he's blessing the house, and he's making commentary about all the statues and pictures and everything we have. And he goes into the bedroom, and he goes, interesting. He blesses the house. Everything's fine. We have dinner. We have a great conversation. We have a couple bourbons. Priest will remain nameless. Couple bourbons. Cigar outside. Father says to me, he goes, so Jim, I noticed bedroom's kind of sparse when it comes to all the things you seem to like. What are you talking about, Father? I knew exactly what he was talking about. He goes, what's the matter? Are you embarrassed? I said, what do you mean embarrassed? He goes, Jim, come on. No crucifix, no Mary, no St. Joseph, no. They're everywhere else in your house. Even the bathroom has a sign. Wash your hands and say your prayers because Jesus and germs are everywhere. Oh, okay, Father. So here's the deal. It feels weird when I'm making love to my wife. He goes, oh, it feels weird because you invented sex? So what are you talking about? He goes, God invented sex, Jim. He knows everything you're doing. He knows everything you're feeling because he made you that way. So you want to hear something incredible? Crucifix now in my bedroom. Statue in my bedroom. And you know what happens? When my wife and I are intimate, I pray first. It's a simple prayer. Lord, help me to touch her how she needs to be touched. Help me to love her how she needs to be loved. Changes everything, ladies and gentlemen. Sexuality, human sexuality, is holy. It is holy. We just have to invite God into it. He wants to be there with us. So in America, we are inundated with pornographic images, hypersexualized images wherever we go. Even walking down the street, billboards, magazines, advertisements, Facebook, Instagram, everywhere. And so what really contributes to this increase? Well, the pandemic certainly didn't help. Keep that in mind. Many, many people went from just exposure to pornography to actual addiction during the pandemic. They were isolated and they were forced to be only online. And the companies knew that. And the biggest porn producers' numbers skyrocketed. Skyrocketed. It's accessible. Everybody has it in their pocket all the time. It's affordable. Listen to this. Pornography is hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars annually. Billions with a B. But 90% of it is free. They're making that kind of money on 10% of the content. That should tell you how big a problem this is. They're making hundreds of billions of dollars on 10% of the content. So most people don't pay for it. It's free. It's affordable. It's anonymous. You know, back when I was growing up in New York, if you wanted to see a dirty movie, you had to go to the video store. And you had to go behind the curtain and rent one. And none of the guys I grew up with, we would never do it because I was always petrified. I can still picture it. You're coming out from behind that curtain that everybody knew what was in there, and there's Mrs. McGillicuddy, my neighbor. What am I going to say to her? So it was much more difficult. Now you can be completely anonymous and watch any kind of depravity, and nobody knows. Well, they do know, but you don't think they know. And that was Dr. Al Cooper back in the 90s who said that about pornography. Recently, Dr. Mark Laser has said the other problem we're faced with is a lot of pornography usage is accidental. Kids are online looking for something totally wholesome, totally innocuous. And boom, they're hit with pornified images. And I don't know about you guys. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. No, I won't. When I was a kid, if I saw something like that, I would have been really curious. And I would have looked. And that's what's happening to our children. And so the devil and the industry knows how to get them. One of the things we have to start looking at right now, this is a different world, ladies and gentlemen. We, in this room, we, in our parishes, we, in our communities, have to start seeing ourselves. Pope Francis said it really, really well. We are a field hospital. That's who we are right now. We don't need to be worried about somebody's cholesterol level or their blood sugars when they have a gaping chest wound. We need to fix and heal the wound. Then we can work on all the other stuff. But until we heal that wound, there's nothing you can do. I spoke a few weeks ago to a young man. Since he was 8 years old, he has desired to be a Franciscan priest. Since 8 years old. He's now 22. The reason he has not become a Franciscan priest is because he is addicted to pornography and he sees no hope. And nobody's ever done anything to help him. No shots on the priest. This is not a knock. But when that young man goes to confession and he confesses this sin and Father says, say 3 Hail Marys and don't do it again, you haven't helped that kid. It's deeper than that. And Father doesn't have the tools in his toolbox. He has not been trained in seminary how to deal with this. So we're building right now, and I'm going to ask for everybody for the next 90 days, please pray for Integrity Restored. We are building an online training program for priests that will be 18 hours. The priests will get a certificate that they are fully trained in how to deal with this. That certificate can be shared with their vicar for clergy, with their superior, with the bishop, and now he knows who he has to refer people. This is what our priests need, because I've never heard a confession. Well, I have, but I don't have the cool stole. I've tried to get one. Father won't give it to me. This is so common. So we need to give our priests these tools. So please, 90 days, we're working on it. I'm going to be in Pennsylvania next week recording 28 hours of videos for this program. When God made our brains, he made them it's really interesting. There is no other instinct in the human body, no other instinct that can so satisfy a human being without accomplishing its biological purpose. Right? If you're hungry, you eat. It accomplishes its purpose. If you're thirsty, you drink. It accomplishes its purpose. But with pornography and masturbation, it does not accomplish its purpose. And yet it feels like, I got that dopamine rush. I feel so good. For a couple minutes until the shame and guilt kick in. And we'll talk about that in a second. The brain reacts like it's a drug. So when you if we had more time, and maybe we'll figure out a way to do something Zoom or share some more information, but the way the brain really works is dopamine, oxytocin, delta phos B, and endorphins. And when you get sexually aroused, those all ramp up. And there's two types of experiences. God is so incredible. When you're watching pornography and masturbating, the ramp up is the same. The plateau is the same. But then you do crash. I mean, literally, if we do blood tests and we do MRIs, we can see the crash that somebody experiences. And that's when shame and guilt really kicks in. When you're with your spouse, ramp up, plateau, and a very gentle decrease in all those chemicals. It's not the crash. How did God know to do that? It's incredible, and it's scientific, and the scientific community hates that we know this. Hates it. Because they want to say it's just Catholic shame and guilt that's ruining it for people. No, it's not. It's chemical, ladies and gentlemen. It's the way God made our brain. The neurochemicals that get produced, they lock in those images, which is why for so many people, years after they stop, they still need help kind of cleaning their brain. One of the things, again, I'm not embarrassed to share it, when I came back to the church, I'm so on fire. I'm going up to receive communion, and my goodness, I look so pious. And I'm really, really excited, and I'm talking to Jesus, and I'm so grateful, and I'm so thankful. And Lord, I can't believe that you, the Lord of Lords and King of Kings, would humble yourself to come into me, to be part of me. And you're walking up to communion, and oh, that's a really cute butt. Even at that moment, our brains are so wired. So what did I have to do? Well, I had to change the narrative. So when that temptation happens now, when that custody of the eyes is lost, and it will be, I'm a man, what do? I say a prayer. I notice, I say, oh Lord, thank you for making this beautiful creature. Thank you for making this incredible daughter of yours. I don't know what she needs right now, Lord, but you do. And so I pray for her. Grant her what she needs. And you know what happens, ladies and gentlemen? The brain chemicals change. I've taken the lust out of it, and I've given it to him. And immediately, the brain chemicals change. They move from the reptile brain to the thinking brain. It's that simple. So we can teach people how to do that. We talked a little bit about the opportunity-induced addiction. It's very, very common now for young people. They didn't go looking for this. They've been exposed to it, and now they're interested, and they're curious. So how do we help them? Father's going to talk about that. When you're dealing with somebody who has a vocation desire, you have to know that these are some of the common psychosocial aspects of what they're dealing with. And I'll leave this slide up there for a minute. And Father, you have a copy of this. Please feel free to send it to all the attendees. When you're dealing with this constant shame from this addiction, you're going to start blaming other people for your addiction. You're going to start blaming other people for all your troubles. You're going to start blaming other people for all your stress because it's too hard to look at yourself. You're going to focus on, I deserve it. It makes me feel good. I'm so depressed. I'm so lonely. I'm so anxious. I'm so tired. I'm so bored. I'm so depressed. Me. Because those chemicals do make you feel good for a couple minutes. You're going to start to get angrier and angrier, and your aggression's going to ramp up. Because when you're not getting those chemicals dumped you want them. Just like any other addiction. Any other addiction. The difference is if you're addicted to alcohol or drugs, that is an external source of supply. With this addiction, we carry around our own source of supply in our brain chemicals. People have told me this is a harder addiction to quit than heroin. Because those chemicals are with us all the time. You can't get rid of them. And your body wants them. The other thing that really happens is lack of empathy. And I think we've all heard this about pornography, how it uses people. But the more you're exposed to that, the more people are no longer people. People are certainly not sons and daughters of God. They're just something there for your pleasure. I have a buddy I grew up with. I know him since 5 years old. Really, really successful guy. He knows the work I do. And he knows who I used to be, so he finds it very comical. Amazing what God can do. And we were talking just a few weeks ago, and he said, Jim, I don't understand. You know, I travel a lot for business. I look at porn. What's the big deal? I said, I hear you, brother. Let me just ask you one question. He's a really cerebral, intellectual guy. I said, one question, and we don't have to talk about it anymore. The more you look at porn, does it cause you to look at other people differently? He said, nah, come on, what are you talking about? Okay. I knew he's going to go back and ponder it. That's what he does. Last week I got a call from him. He goes, I freaking hate you, man. It does. He calls me Jimmy. He goes, Jimmy, it really does. I try not to, but it does. What do I do? It's going to take away your empathy. You can't help it. On the motivational side, and this is really important in young people's lives, they're going to continue to withdraw into themselves, deeper and deeper into isolation the more pornography they use. Even from their family, they're going to disconnect, from their faith community, from their friends. Things that used to make them happy. Sports, playing music, going out with friends, dancing, whatever it is, starts to become boring. This is the only thing that they're interested in. So they're going to withdraw and disconnect more and more. The other problem we're having increasingly is boundary issues. Kids today talk about masturbating like it's nothing. They tell each other when they're doing it. They have no boundaries when it comes to the opposite sex. They don't know them because all this stuff has become completely normalized to them. So the boundaries are dropped. The fastest growing, listen to this, the fastest growing sexual abuse in the United States is child-on-child sexual abuse. They're seeing this stuff and they're trying it out on each other. And they're kids. The damage is still done, but it's 2 children. What do? Keep your kid locked up in the house forever? You can't do that. You've got to train. I tell parents all the time, you've got to have this conversation with your children early and often. It's not a one and done birds and the bees like when we were growing up. Or Tyrannosaurus and pterodactyls when Father Martin was growing up. This addiction actually leads to compulsions. And those compulsions are getting stranger and stranger because the pornography that they're producing is getting stranger and stranger. You see, the way the brain works, and God made it this way for a good reason, but the brain is always looking for something novel, something new. So when you're watching pornography, you get bored. Naked people don't do it anymore, so you have to start looking for other things. And those things are getting darker and stranger as time goes on because they want you spending time on their site. They want to keep you locked there. Here's some of the saddest truths that we deal with, that you are going to be dealing with. And you need to know this about the person sitting across from you. Because of their pornography usage, they really do believe that they're basically bad and they're basically unworthy. That's their starting point. That is their reality, no matter what you tell them. Oh, my son, you are beloved of the God of heaven and earth. I'm really bad, man. That's what they believe with all their soul. If anybody really knew me, they wouldn't love me. And that's why this addiction stays in the dark. And that's why we need to be the ones bringing it out into the light. Because how can we have almost probably 90% of our younger generation believe that if anybody really knew them, they wouldn't love them? What a horrible place to be. My needs are never going to be met by other people. My needs will never be met. The only thing that makes me happy, that meets my needs, is pornography or sex. Wow. We have a whole generation that believe this. And they don't believe God cares. You know why they don't believe that? Because they have prayed. These good, young Catholic men and women have prayed. And they've gone to confession. And they have prayed fervently. And they've gone to adoration. And they say 18 and a half rosaries a week. They have because they fall asleep. And they do everything that they think they should do. And God doesn't take it away. So God doesn't care. Well, that's not true. God wants our cooperation in this journey and recovery. Because when they do recover, and I've seen it thousands and thousands of times, those people are transformed. And they transform the people that they meet. You've never seen someone so full of the Holy Spirit as someone who has been through this battle and come out the other side. It's incredible what God does with it. Overcoming shame. This is really, really going to be important in the conversations you have and the work you do. You have to increase comfort with that person with appropriate vulnerability, which means you have to be somewhat vulnerable too. I'm not saying share all your sins and your past experiences. That's not healthy either. But there needs to be some vulnerability where you build trust, where it feels safe. And then you can really experience, and that person who believes nobody can love them will start to exchange with you on a deeper level. That is going to be critical in your work. It's different for every person you speak to, what that looks like. But this slide needs to be in the back of your mind. How do I get that person to feel that? Here's a little bit about our brain. Sorry I didn't pick the best colors. I'm not a PowerPoint professional like Father Sean Aaron, but I know you are, man. I've seen them. There's really a few parts of our brain. There's the thinking brain, the feeling brain, the lizard brain that I talked about before, and then the remembering brain. And every human being has this, and this is how our brains work. And what ends up happening, we have something that God created called an arousal template. Everybody has it. Single, married, celibate, doesn't matter. God made our brain that way. Arousal is not only sexual arousal, though that is a really big one, but any kind of arousal. Anger, excitement, anything. When that happens in your brain, look at the areas it takes over. It takes over the remembering part of your brain. So you remember when you experienced this before, and the brain chemicals start dumping. It absolutely takes over the feeling part of your brain, and that's why you get feelings and, again, neurochemicals coursing through your body, which is exactly how it's supposed to work. And then finally, the lizard brain, the reptile brain. That's the deepest part of your brain. We've all heard of the 3 F's, right? Fight, flee, freeze. That part of our brain that God made so that we could survive as a species. Well, there's a 4th F that doesn't get talked about in polite company. Fight, flee, freeze, fornicate. It's all the same part of your brain. It's the deepest recesses. It doesn't think. It operates on pure instinct. So when that arousal template gets kicked off, your thinking part of your brain, your logical part of your brain, the frontal lobe, actually goes dark. It's crazy to see in an MRI machine. If I put people in an MRI machine and show them pornographic images, dark, the deepest part of their brain fires up. And God did that so we would procreate and populate the earth, and it was good, right? Didn't Genesis tell us? And it was good. But we've allowed it to be warped. And so what ends up happening is the brain starts to say, well, the thinking part of the brain starts to say, well, I need to do this. This is the only way I feel good. This is the only thing that gives me pleasure. This is the only thing that brings me happiness. How sad. Here's the other thing you're going to be faced with in your work that drives a lot of pornography usage. There's 2 types of traumas in the world. There's big T traumas, and you will be faced with people who have big T traumas in their life. Sexual abuse, the death of a parent, divorce. I mean, there's tons of them you can think about. That is a huge trauma in the life of a child. And a lot of those people are going to struggle with pornography because they found that that is a good self-soothing tool for their hurt, for their wound, for that trauma. But here's the reality. Even if they don't have a big T trauma in their life, all of us, as human beings, have a lot of little T traumas in our life. Every single person alive. And God knew this. I mean, I think it was interesting. You know, Jesus did not say, pick up your birthday cake and follow me. He said, pick up your cross. Because he knew. Right? He spoke to me. He spoke to you. He spoke to all of us when he said that. We all, if we don't have a big T trauma, we all have a bunch of little T traumas. And they aggregate. And they build up over time. And our young people today in particular are faced with constant barrage of little T traumas with exposure to pornography. Think of an 8, 9, 10-year-old child. And that's the average age. So there's a lot younger who are seeing pornographic images on a regular basis. Well, you know what? That's a lot of little T's building up in that kid's life. So you are going to be dealing with people who are wounded. Everybody is wounded. When you marry, constant exposure to sexual content, and you make that part of the social fabric of a society, that's sexualization. So you have now sexualized everything that this person experiences, the lens at which they look through life, the glasses that they put on to look at all life situations are done in a lens of sexualization. If your child is on TikTok, if they're on Instagram, if they're on Facebook, if they're on, pick a site today, the content is sexualized, if not outright pornographic. And so when you're doing that to a brain, the brain starts to say, well, everything is sexual if it's worth anything at all. What a contrary notion to what we are trying to tell the world. That's why this is a battle for the ages. This is a battle for souls. This is a battle for truth. We'll go through quick. We've talked about it. 93% of boys, 62% of girls exposed before the age of 18. Again, I think the numbers are probably even a little bit higher than that. Most kids won't admit it. 70% of boys spend more than 30 minutes on at least one occasion. That's probably once a week. 23% of girls, same thing. Girls more and more. It's really kind of scary. It's increasing rapidly with females. And it's not just young females. It's women across the board. And the reason why is they're being told to lie. They should do the same thing. They should act the same way men act. They should want the same thing men want. You know, when I started this work 8 years ago, I used to be able to say, well, the men. I can't say that anymore. Everybody's struggling with this. Up to 40% of Christian women in a recent survey have said they've watched porn in the last month to spice up their relationship with their husband. How sad. It doesn't spice it up, ladies and gentlemen. It hurts it. Group sex, same sex, bestiality, every depravity you can possibly imagine is what these kids are facing. And young men today and men of all ages suffer from real sexual dysfunction. And that dysfunction is a disconnection of what God intended the marital act to be, and intimacy to be, not just sexual intimacy, emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy, communication intimacy, financial intimacy. All of this is important to that relationship, and it's all destroyed by this. Because what happens is that women, or men, if they're same-sex attracted, become totally objectified. You're there for my pleasure and my pleasure only, and if you don't serve that purpose, you're no good to me. It shows men having power. You will not imagine the amount of wives that I have spoken to in the past 8 years who have been physically harmed by their otherwise loving husbands in the marital act because he's watching that kind of behavior on porn and he wants to act it out. Choking, violence, depravity, it becomes normal. And it becomes what's arousing. So this is happening in marriages all the time. And the intensity has to keep ramping up, or the brain chemicals. See, what happens when you're overproducing, particularly dopamine in the brain, which is what pornography does, overproduces dopamine. The brain is smart. It starts to shut down dopamine receptors because it says, that's too much. That's no good. So it starts to shut down the dopamine receptors, and then what do you have to do? You have to watch more, spend more time watching, or more and more violent and strange to get the same level of dopamine. So the intensity is going to ramp up. For our women, our young ladies, and our women out there, with the hypersexualized notion that everybody has of femininity, that means promiscuity brings you love. and acceptance. Dressing scantily brings you love and acceptance. Watching pornography brings you love and acceptance. Sharing nudes brings you love and acceptance. Beauty is only as good as you could turn me on. That's beauty. Sexualized beauty. There's no other kind of beauty. Now, I could tell you something. When I look out and I see these holy sisters, can somebody tell me that's not beautiful? Ladies and gentlemen, can somebody tell me that's not beautiful? That is beautiful. But the world doesn't want to believe that anymore. And your significance is only in relation to your sexual value. Wow. I think women have a lot more to contribute than just that. So what do we do? Well, this is a great step, and Father, God bless you, brother. Thank you for having me here. Education. We have to bring this out of the darkness and start talking about it. I wish we were doing it more in parishes. But people are afraid. So who here is going to say, I'm tired of being afraid. I'm not going to be afraid anymore. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to bring people to help. I'm going to love them where they are. In their brokenness, in the dirtiness that I don't want to talk about, but I'm going to. You know, I say all the time, think. After Mass on a Sunday, you're standing there, back of the church, you're talking to Father, you're saying, wow, that homily sucked. I mean, Father, that was great. Thank you so much for that homily. And somebody comes up and they say, hey, I really need some help. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a drug addict. I've seen people dive over pews to help that person. But if somebody says, I'm a porn addict or I'm a sex addict, we run away. God forgive us. That is much more common today than alcoholism or drugs. And we run away? Not anymore. You've been told. Now you have a responsibility. There's a reason you're here in this room. We need to be able to intervene. We need to be able to help our priests. Look, they're hearing it in confession all weekend. They're tired of it too, believe me. But they can't do it all. So we as lay people need to be that resource. Go have coffee with somebody who's struggling. If it's a wife who's struggling with betrayal trauma because of her husband's pornography use and his sexual abuse of her in the marital act, don't run away from it. Take her for a coffee. Let her put her head on your shoulder and sob. Validate her. What she's saying is true. Betrayal trauma is just like PTSD. Manifests itself the same way. There's physical manifestations, emotional, spiritual, psychological. And this woman is suffering alone. Because I will tell you, 95% of wives who are struggling with betrayal trauma will not even tell their mom. Why? Because she's protecting her husband. She's protecting her husband. You women are incredible. Guys would never do that. But you're doing it, and you're suffering silently. So bring it up. You will be amazed at the conversations you will have with people. Learn to talk about it. Educate yourself. This is the first step. Visit integrityrestored.com. Visit other websites. Learn about this problem. It's everywhere. If you yourself aren't struggling, you know and love someone who is. Period. And then have hope. The God of all wonders made our brain neuroplastic. It's amazing, ladies and gentlemen. The brain can change. The brain can change. And I call it a 3-step process. Reset, and that's helping somebody with their goals and aspirations, because when they're in this rut, they're not thinking about that. Reboot, how do we help that dopamine desire? What triggers are there normally in their life that we have to watch out for and give them tools and equip them with other ideas when they're triggered? And then how do we rewire? And that's taking it out of that lizard part of the brain, moving it to the front of the brain, the thinking part of the brain, and start to insert some competing behaviors. Here's one of the best things. I'm going to give you a trick. Somebody tells you they're struggling with pornography, they're tempted all the time, I don't know what to do. Here's what you do. 15 minutes of active distraction. When you are tempted, do something else for 15 minutes. It generally means you have to physically change location. This normally happens in the bedroom and bathroom for most people. Got to get out of your bedroom or bathroom. Go to another room in the house. Do some push-ups. Do some sit-ups. Go for a walk. Listen to a podcast. Move your brain from the reptile part to the thinking part, and all of a sudden that temptation is not so impossible anymore. Guys, you've been awesome. I know it's a tough subject. Thank you so much for having me. And Father and I will take questions afterwards.
Hey.